Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Liza Choi as one of the lead organizers. I'm honored to open today's webinar, Leadership Matters, Driving Change and Innovation in Higher Education and Healthcare. The event began with a simple but urgent question. In the face of today's challenges, what does leadership really look like? Together with Dr. Lily Lum, I imagine a space not only to listen to experts, but to reflect across contexts, higher education, healthcare, workplaces, and beyond. Our hope is that today sparks new ideas and inspires fresh ways of thinking about leadership that you can carry back into your own settings. Because leadership is not limited to a title, a discipline, or a sector. It is present everywhere in classrooms, hospitals, research teams, business meetings, and policy-making tables, and its impact is profound. Leadership shapes culture, resilience, and ultimately the well-being of people and communities. And today's turnout is proof of that. We have participants from over 19 countries, more than 166 cities, spanning all 5 continents. Today, we are delighted to have 3 highly experienced and knowledgeable speakers to share their insights with us. Dr. Barling will invite us to reflect on why leadership matters and what it makes possible. Dr. Saewyc will show how leadership comes alive in practice, especially in higher education and nursing. Dr. Chapman will explore where leadership must go in shaping policy and brainstorm on the system level. Together, their voices remind us that leadership is not abstract. It is alive, tested in tough times, and a force for thriving environments. With that, it is my pleasure to hand the mic to our moderator, Heather Hines, who will guide us through today's session. Heather, over to you.
Thanks so much, Lisa. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, whatever time zone you're joining us from, welcome. As Lisa has indicated, my name is Heather Hines. I use she, her pronouns, and I will be your moderator today. I know this will be a thought-provoking and educational session, and I'm sure you're as eager as I am to begin. Before we start, however, I'd like to take a moment for a land acknowledgement, a common practice here in Canada to express gratitude to Indigenous peoples for the lands where we live. Personally, I recognize that truth and reconciliation cannot be about passively saying words, but instead be about actively learning, unlearning, listening, and speaking up when witnessing words or behaviors that are contrary to the commitments we've made to Indigenous peoples. So today, I'd like to acknowledge the land where I'm situated. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. Today, this meeting place is still the home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and I'm grateful to have the opportunity to work and live on this land. If you would like to share which lands you're joining from today, feel free to put it in the chat. I will also say if you would just like to introduce yourself and let us know where you are joining from, we would be happy for you to do that at this point. Please note that the chat will be disabled later on once our speakers begin so that we can really focus on our panelists and what they're sharing with us. So thank you for that. So while you're introducing yourselves, I want to do a little housekeeping. First, I'm going to ask that you please remain muted during the session. We have quite a large crowd, so muted mics will help everyone hear clearly with no need for repetition. In addition, for increased accessibility, the closed captioning function is turned on and available to you if you need it. We will have a Q&A period in the latter half of the session. Please do use the Q&A option and not the chat, which is going to be disabled, like I said, to share with the hosts and panelists. Please don't take it personally if your question is skipped or it's bundled with another. We simply want to cover the widest range of questions possible from the audience while also staying on schedule. So thank you for your understanding on that. Note that the session is being recorded for knowledge mobilization, and so by joining today, you're consenting to that recording. Lastly, this is an educational forum, and we ask that you enter this space with the fullest respect for the organizers and support team who have spent a great deal of time curating this experience for you, our speakers who have taken time from their busy schedules to be with us, and for all the participants who have joined us today. Should we run into any issues with participants unwilling or unable to engage in respectful dialogue, you will be removed from the session. Lastly, in the event of technical challenges and this Zoom connection becoming unstable, we will stop this meeting. Participants will be emailed an alternate link using the email you signed up with, and we will regroup there immediately. So at this point, I'd like to introduce the organizing team. First, we have Liza Choi, who you heard from just before me, Associate Professor in the School of Nursing and Midwifery at Mount Royal University. We also have Dr. Lily Lum, Professor Emerita from the School of Nursing at York University. Thank you, Lisa and Lily, for your efforts thus far. I would be remiss if I didn't also introduce Maddie Borberly, our Zoom lead for today, as well as Kalaha, our digital lead, who will be helping with background technology and our chat and our Q&A functions. We are incredibly grateful for their support. For additional details on our organizing team, please refer to the biographies that I'm going to make available in the chat. So we're going to continue to move forward. And as Lisa said, we have three amazing panelists with us today. And we're going to start with Dr. Barling. I will say I've noticed all the introductions that are happening. Thank you to everyone and welcome from all the places from which you're joining. This is very, very exciting. We're really pleased to have you with us. So as I said, we're going to start with Dr. Julian Barling as our first speaker. Dr. Barling is a distinguished university professor at Queen's and the Borden Chair of Leadership in the Smith School of Business. He has received numerous awards for research and teaching and was most recently given the Golden Apple Award for teaching excellence and innovation. Maclean's also named Dr. Barling as one of Queen's University's most popular professors in 1996. There's much more, but I'll direct you to Dr. Barling's expanded bio that I will drop in the chat shortly. All this to say that we're very fortunate to have Dr. Barling with us, and with that, I'll turn the proceedings over to him. Dr. Barling.
Thank you, Heather, and thank you to the organizing team and to Lisa for the original invitation. Can I just ask, can you see my slides?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay. Excellent. Thank you very much. So what I'd like to do this afternoon is take you through three thoughts about leadership. So an agenda for this afternoon's 20-minute introduction to leadership, if I might. What's the very best of leadership? And I hope to present or offer or share a controversial idea. What are the biggest obstacles to the best of leadership? And what are the biggest opportunities that leaders have, especially in their toughest times? Before I start, the topic for the afternoon is leadership matters. And if you can just have a look over my right shoulder, I have a painting of Mandela, which is in my office at all times. And it's for me a constant daily reminder of just how much leadership matters. To put that in context, you probably have recognized my accent. I spent my formative years in South Africa. And I think you cannot understand our formative history without understanding Mandela. So what is the very best of leadership? The ideas I'm going to share this afternoon are all evidence-informed. So they have three foundations. So the ideas are based on about 90 years of social science research from good times and bad times, from social science and leadership researchers, many of whom you've probably heard, Marie Jahoda, Abe Maslow, Bernie Bass, and the list goes on and on. From research that I've conducted with current and former grad students over the past 4 decades and counting, and from recent interactions with business leaders and interactions from the past over the last 3 or so decades. And this is, in a sense, what has informed my ideas about leadership. So the first topic, what is the very best of leadership? I've looked hard and wide for a definition, a challenge of the best of leadership. And the best that I've come across is a comment by Indra Nooyi, who was president and CEO of PepsiCo. And Indra Nooyi offered the following challenge. Please help others rise. Your greatness comes not from a position, but from helping build a future. We have an obligation to pull others up. And if you look at that, I think you'll see that there are actually 3 different ideas in this. And I would just like to emphasize these 3 different ideas. So the very first comment is, please help others rise. Please help others rise. And I think your entire leadership challenge can be encapsulated in that idea. We're at our very best in our leadership roles when we elevate other people, when we help them rise, especially in their toughest moments, when we perhaps help people see further than they currently see, when we help people believe that they can do more than they currently do, when they have the mindset that, as long as I work hard enough, there's almost nothing I cannot do in this place. Those are the people who we want in our organizations. And I'll return to that at the end of the 20 minutes or so in which I'll share these ideas. So please help others rise. And then Indra Nooyi goes on to say, your greatness comes not from a position, let's add a title, how large your office is, whether you have 1 or 2 windows and so forth, but the extent to which you help build a future, the extent to which you help build a future for your organization, the extent to which you help build a future for your current employees. I think that's what evidences your greatness. And then she says, we have an obligation to pull others up. We have an obligation to pull others up. And I would like to modify that slightly, because to me, the term obligation sounds negative. So perhaps let's just change the word obligation and think that we have a responsibility to pull others up. So please help others rise. Your greatness comes not from a position, from helping build a future, and we have a responsibility to pull others up. But I think responsibility still doesn't emphasize what you have in your hands. And I think what I would like to say is we have the privilege of pulling others up. Not everybody gets this privilege. So what is the leadership challenge? Please help others rise. And your greatness comes not from your position, from your status, but it's from what you leave when you're no longer there. And we have this privilege to help others rise. So with that in mind, with these thoughts from Indra Nooyi, if I can contrast the very best and the very worst of leadership, I would say that the very best of leaders elevate their followers, and the very worst of leaders, dreadful leaders, demean their followers. So in contrast to picking them up, they demean them, they belittle them, they make them feel smaller. They make them feel smaller. They squelch them, they steamroll them, they make them feel invisible. And to share the idea of what I think the very best of leadership is, and they do all of this in 60 seconds or less. They do all of this in 60 seconds or less. Leadership is not about, and we'll get onto this in a moment, the biggest things you've ever done. Leadership truly is about those moments in which you pick people up, and sadly, sometimes leaders belittle their people. Just think of these terms, belittle, little. They make them feel smaller. And what's the problem with that from an organizational perspective? When people feel small, they act small. They behave small, and their contribution is small. And you can just substitute the term invisible. When people feel invisible, they behave that way. So we have the opportunity, we have the privilege in helping to elevate our folks. And from there, let me transition to, but what are the biggest obstacles in doing that? What are the biggest obstacles to to the very best of leadership, to elevating your followers, to picking them up. And I think that there are three that are worth mentioning. And I think they're worth mentioning because I think there's something we can do about each of them. So the first is, I believe after many decades of research and practice in the area, I think we overthink leadership. I think that leadership non-development is a very significant issue in most organizations, and I hope to be able to show that to you. And I think that leaders' mental health is something we should be focusing on, especially since the pandemic, but largely goes unnoticed. It largely goes unnoticed. So the first obstacle, I think, is overthinking leadership. And the problem is that most leaders overestimate and overthink what is needed. In a sense, they believe that extraordinary times must surely call for extraordinary leadership behaviors. They believe that achieving extraordinary change must surely call for extraordinary leadership, the kind of leadership that you're lucky if you're born with. And yet, I would argue that the data from leadership science, leadership research, suggests the opposite. In the medical area, we're accustomed to thinking about dose-dependent relationships, that if we can give a bit more medication, perhaps people get a bit better. And it turns out in the leadership environment, very often when you do more, you get worse outcomes. You get worse outcomes because you decrease clarity, because ambiguity increases, because overload increases. So it turns out that the problem is most leaders overestimate what they should do, especially in troubled times. The reality, in contrast to what people believe, is that the best of leadership can be summed up in what are the smallest things you can do to make a meaningful difference in other people's lives. What are the smallest things you can do to make a difference? Right? And I think this becomes even more important in people's worst moments. I wish we had the time. I'd be able to show you that if you think about your own experiences with leadership, that the best leaders you've ever encountered, the influence that they had on you was not because of something that they, in a sense, something absolutely major that they did, but in a very tough moment for yourself, they stopped and they literally saw you. They literally saw you. They didn't ignore you. They thanked you. They recognized you. And when we look back and you ask people to remember the best of leadership, they don't tell us about enormous behaviors. They tell about the behaviors that took 60 seconds or less. The good news about that is we can change those behaviors. The best of leadership is not about changing your personality or your character or anything like that. The best of leadership is about focusing on the smallest things you can do to make a meaningful difference in other people's lives. And why, especially in their worst possible moments, in a sense, why especially when they're down? Because when they're down, you can just pick them up more. You can just have a greater effect, and they will want to return, in a sense, the gratitude with interest. So I think that we need to think about leadership differently. We need to think about our own leadership differently. I think a second obstacle, and this is a major obstacle in most organizations, I wish I could see everybody's screen at the moment, but I'm going to ask you to reflect on this possible question. So how many of you received leadership training and development from your organization before you assumed your first significant leadership position? Right? If you want to put that in the chat and so forth, it's a sort of a yes and no question. But how many of you, before you took on your first leadership significant leadership position, received training for that position. And I don't have exact data. But if you're anything like every other organization I've worked for and colleagues, people like myself who do similar work with people like yourselves, here's my guess. Probably 95% of you didn't. We do a terrible job of training people for their leadership positions. We do the kind of job that we would never do with people who hold other roles. In the medical arena, as just one example, you would never let somebody go out and practice their role before they've received more than enough training. But in the arena of leadership, we just assume that everybody knows what the best of leadership is. And sadly, that's just not the case. There is one organization that does it really well all the time. And it's an organization that typically does things, that typically is the brunt of many, many jokes. It's the military. You never really get to promotion until you've received that training. So I see that my time is almost up. Mental health, if I can just make a quick comment about this. We know and do a lot about employees' mental health. And in contrast, we know comparatively little about leaders' mental health. And the reason for that is we believe that leaders must surely be resilient, dynamic, stable, and so forth. Otherwise, they would never have been promoted in the first place. I think COVID showed that that's just not the case. That is simply not the case. And I think we can make a really significant impact on leadership if we go out and actively encourage leaders' mental health and well-being. We hear about terms like burnout, quiet quitting, and so forth. I think it's time to do something about it. A colleague, Simon Rago, who's a clinical psychologist, and I have just completed a book. It comes out in December. It's a workbook for leaders to help them improve their mental health. And if you're interested, that's a QR code for a copy of the book. What are the biggest opportunities that leaders have? I think that leaders can create the conditions under which people thrive and want to help their clients and organizations do the same. So that would be the first thing that leaders can do to help their employees. I have 4 slides summarizing a particular study. Here's the QR code. I'll just summarize it really quickly. Dong Liu and his colleagues did a study in an ICU unit at the start of COVID in Chengdu, China. They got permission to randomly assign 20 people working in the ICU to the experimental and 20 people to the control unit. What did they do differently? It is so small. Remember, what are the smallest things you can do? It's remarkable. The people who in the experimental condition received emails from their HR director or their unit supervisor. And essentially the emails, which I'm just showing you the slide quickly because that's how long the email was, basically said, your job is incredibly important. Your job is really important. You have an opportunity to save people, to make a difference in their families' lives and so forth. And 2 weeks after they received these emails, they could show that what they call taking charge behaviors, which is critical in an ICU, increased by 29% as rated by supervisors. So not rated by themselves, as rated by their supervisors, who did not know which group people were in. So I think that's a very significant change. And their own self-reported work engagement changed by 10%. What are the smallest things we can do to help people want to do so much more? We overlook what we can do, especially in the worst possible times when we feel overloaded. We think people must surely understand how much their work means. And no matter who you are and where you are, being reminded can be such an important boost. So create the conditions under which people want to do absolutely amazing work, and elevate others. Just to come back to this notion, elevate others. Let me just tell you a story about George Conant. So who was he? He was the former CEO of Campbell Soup, worldwide Campbell Soup. And he had this practice. He would get to work every morning and he would deliberately look for success stories involving employees. In essence, everybody in the organization around the world, if you were a supervisor, if any of your employees did something truly remarkable, it was your role to let him know immediately. And what he would then do was to send a handwritten note to that person saying thank you. I was with an MBA group recently, and while I'm telling the story, there's this gentleman in the audience, and his hand is raised, and he's getting really excited, and he almost can't wait for me to finish. And when I finish, I go to him and I say yes, and he says, "I'll tell you," because I said to him, "What's going on?" He said, "I'll tell you what happened." He said, "I worked at Campbell Soup quite a few years ago." He said, "I got a thank you letter from the CEO, and it's still framed in my office." And, it doesn't matter who you are. We're all suckers for this, right? If we get those, they are so important. Think of this. How many of you have got a thank you card from a former leader and you still have it? It's 3, 4, 5 or more years later, and it's still in your drawer. And when you have a really bad day, you still go back to it and you look at that card and you just feel better about yourself. And I think it just gets back to the question of what are the smallest things you can do to help elevate others, to help pick others up, to help them feel that they can and want to do amazing things for the organization. Don't overthink leadership. You have an amazing opportunity to help others, to help inspire others. So just my concluding comments, the challenge is what are the smallest things you can do? And if I can quote Warren Buffett, only when the tide goes out do you discover who's been swimming naked. And from an organizational perspective, I think he's correct. And at the beginning of COVID, the tide went out. And we found out just how many organizations were swimming naked. And I think for too long, organizations have only benefited the few. And I think the challenge that we have now and the challenge that we can confront and overcome and make a real difference is what are the smallest possible things we can do going forward to build healthy, safe, and productive workplaces that benefit all their members. Thank you very much.
Dr. Barling, thank you. I can see many people are using the emotions. I see hearts and applauding hands throughout your talk. I can see why you were voted one of the most popular professors. Thank you so much. I was really struck by your comment about sometimes leadership is in the small things, and that's very much the case. Something I've personally experienced and something I try to remember as I move through space. So thank you. I'm sure we're gonna have a lot of good questions for you as we move on. But honestly, that was wonderful. As we move on, I would like to introduce now Dr. Elizabeth Saewyc. So Dr. Saewyc is a professor and distinguished university scholar. Since 2017, she's been the director of the School of Nursing at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver. Dr. Saewyc has provided consultation on adolescent health nationally and internationally, including for the Chief Public Health Officer of Canada, the U.S. White House under President Obama, and the World Health Organization. Dr. Saewyc is also a skilled administrator, and UBC nursing has flourished under her leadership. For more biographical details, please refer to the expanded description that I will place in the chat once more. Dr. Saewyc, welcome, and I turn the floor over to you. I will ask Dr. Barling if you could stop sharing, and then we could, that would be helpful. That way we could focus in on Dr. Saewyc. Wonderful. Thank you so much. Dr. Saewyc.
Thank you very much, Heather. And hello, everyone. It is my pleasure to be part of this discussion. And it's great to actually follow Dr. Barling and have that opportunity to reflect on how I may have come up with slightly different ways of saying some of the same things, and some examples of where that has supported me in my time. So I've been the director of the School of Nursing at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver since 2017. When I became director, the biggest thing on the horizon for our school was actually celebrating our 100th anniversary in 2019. And I thought, I can plan a party. This will be great. But within a month of becoming director, a number of major opportunities and challenges arose, and they continued over those next few years. First was like the chance to plan a new building, the first purpose-built building for the school that we'd ever had in our 100 years. Sudden retirements of faculty due to health issues. The request that our nurse practitioner program double, just as I was realizing that the financial support for our NP program only covered about 2/3 of the cost of the program. So expanding it would be like digging the hole deeper. We had the death of a beloved faculty member from cancer, and then the COVID pandemic, and then other opportunities for expansion, for new programs, hiring a lot of new faculty, a lot of different things that have gone on over the last 8 years. And during those times and navigating that change, I've been reflecting on the things I've learned in that leadership role. And my sharing of these is aligned a lot with Dr. Barling. The first that I would say is an important role for leaders, and what makes really effective leaders in nursing is reflecting the vision of nursing to ourselves and to others. We need to be eloquent about who nurses are and what they can do, both in academia and in practice, for those outside the profession, but also for those within the profession. And a key part of this is that helping others rise means also expressing that confidence in them. You've got this. Being able to share with others that we do have the skill sets and the knowledge and the expertise, every one of us, in the moment for the work that we're doing. And being able to express that gratitude and that knowledge for the people who are doing it. We've also spent a lot of time in practice, and those roles actually can be translated in leadership into a wider circle. So our can-do attitude in nursing, we have to figure out the workarounds. We have to be able to do something. Our problem-solving skills at the bedside, in the clinic, actually translate into leadership as well. And our ability to coordinate care across a number of different health professions, advocating for our patients, that actually also helps translate into leadership within universities, where other academics may have really limited knowledge about what nurses do or what we're capable of. And also helps us translate in health systems, where again, not everybody knows what nursing does, or their ideas may be informed by the latest television shows, which aren't always accurate. So a key portion of our role is just being advocating and positive about what nursing does. An example of this is during the pandemic. As the initial announcement of the pandemic happened, universities across British Columbia started pulling all of our students out of classrooms and clinic because of COVID. And yet our health authorities desperately wanted our nursing students to remain in practice in support of the crisis, because nursing students actually do provide care. So as a group of nurse leaders within British Columbia, one of the things we needed to do was actually come together and articulate our responsibilities as nurses, our ethical responsibility. In fact, it's built into our Canadian Nurse Association Code of Ethics. There is a responsibility around pandemics that we were able to bring back to our leadership and to government as well, to actually say, we need to stay our students need to be there. And we are actually educated from the very beginning in protective healthcare, infection control, all of those things. We have the skills and knowledge to be able to do this. So part of that was working to get the ministries of health to actually speak to the presidents of our universities. And we were able to ensure that our students and their educators remained in practice. We had to figure out some workarounds for our courses being some of them in person in smaller groups. But a key part of it was we were there and we were able to help a really struggling health system in some of those big challenges. And a key part of it was actually telling our students, you've got this. Your very first courses were in hand washing and infection control. You know how to do this. The other thing I've learned is that nursing leadership doesn't lead alone. We crowdsource effective solutions. You know, one of those first mistaken ideas I had as a leader was that we have to have all the answers and we have to solve all the problems. Because people do keep looking to us for those solutions or those decisions, sometimes even like wanting us to use power to compel others to change their behavior. Yeah, you fix this, whatever these people are doing. In academia, in healthcare, everywhere, the idea that we have power over people is often mistaken. And trying to exercise that kind of coercive power is pretty much going to backfire. It's more realistic to consider that as leaders, we have persuasive power to inspire people to move in the same direction. But a key part of that is actually, as an effective strategy, asking for others' ideas, listening closely, working with them to clearly identify the problems because they might actually have greater knowledge about what is the challenge, and then brainstorming those solutions together, and then making a decision for the team if needed, while actively and publicly giving credit to the others who contributed to those ideas. That is an important element, and it is part of that, as Dr. Barling said, helping people rise and creating those opportunities. For us, that example of expanding our program for the nurse practitioners, it required some very different ways of working together within our program. And for a group that had been in place and was teaching in the same way for 10 and 15 years, suddenly doubling, and then in fact we were asked to double again, meant really needing to think of some new ways of doing things. But so encouraging our team to work together to identify those ideas and decisions, and me being able to express my confidence in their ability to come up with those creative solutions and inspiring them with key questions like when they were stuck, meant that they were actually involved in and had ownership over those decisions and those changes. And it meant that I was able to use their knowledge and skill, because I'm not a nurse practitioner, to actually come up with the really effective things. So effective leadership is consultative and collaborative. It is a bit of a balancing act, though, because you can't take so long in the process of consulting with others that you dither over making those decisions, because then you'll be considered ineffectual. Nor can you make too many snap decisions without asking people's input, because then you can be seen as dictatorial. People do have expertise and key knowledge of what's challenging in their environment. And they may even have really clear ideas of how to change things. And so it's really important to draw on that. And it's really important, if things didn't go the way you hoped, that you're the first to acknowledge that you got it wrong and be willing to change and to change course. And that comes back to the other thing Dr. Barling said that I was like, yes, believing in people and believing people matter, because they really do. I found in my role over the last 8 years as director, I have had the great privilege of working with people, some of whom are really frustrating in their roles and sometimes created to some disruptive or negative environments. And partly that was because they didn't feel that their hard work was appreciated, or they didn't feel like they mattered. And part of it was sometimes they weren't actually given the opportunities to rise and to take on roles. So a key part of what I learned about my role was actually finding the right place for their skill sets or for their aspirations and their ideas to be able to take on that work. And, you know, when it works, and when you use those same small actions, as Dr. Barling said, that frequent gratitude, that appreciation, recognizing when people are doing things well, it actually helps bolster that trust, and it motivates that participation. I'm glad to know that there's like evidence that that works, because I've also seen it in our school. Helping find the right opportunities for people and giving them the chance to take those on, and being open to some new ideas along the way, and not shutting things down or belittling people, but actually creating that openness really can be magic. One of our examples of that was we had an amazing faculty member who was the head of our skills lab and simulation, and she retired after 30 years with the university. And she was so incredible that she actually did like amazing work, and trying to replicate that magic with a single person. Our team came and said, this is just not possible. We don't know how she did it, but we just can't do that. And we were finding that we would hire some our simulation coordinator and others, and they would leave after a very short time because they were just overwhelmed. And some of our team actually came to me and said, you know what, we really think we need to do this differently. And we'd like to try to do some different planning and restructure this leadership role and these other opportunities. And that took some moments of thinking through and then saying, all right, great, come up with an idea. Let's, come up with a plan. Let's make this happen. And that change, that actually meant that there were multiple people taking on this role together, as well as creating a new role that was broader than the undergraduate program to integrate simulation into our education. An associate director of experiential learning created an opportunity for people to show their skills, but it also meant that I didn't need the expertise to do this well. I needed to listen and trust and create those opportunities for people. And that has been a very important thing. Healthcare settings are similar to education. Nurses, we have struggled, in fact, we still do, to be recognized for our key role in health systems, for our knowledge and our expertise, and to have a place at decision tables and to be able to affect that change. And I think, we can live in that frustration and powerlessness and grouse about or complain about not being invited to the tables where decisions are made. Or we can speak positively as a group about what we can do and what we do. We can collaborate with other nurse leaders and other professions. We can be generous in our willingness to move things forward. And we can even create our own tables to become a place where our voices can be heard. I'd like to use just an example, our Nurse Education Council of BC, which is a group of all the heads of schools of nursing across the province. There are 17 of us, and in the territories, also from Northwest Territory, the one school of nursing there, we have their member join us. This was created as a group just for us to provide a little emotional support for each other, to share some of our solutions, and to speak about what we were seeing in the world. But one of the things that we ended up doing, and I can't take credit for this because this was started before I became a member of the group, but I've certainly seen its effectiveness, and I've continued to support doing that, is we started inviting government and the nursing regulators, the BC College of Nurses and Midwives, and the chief nursing officer in the Nursing Policy Secretariat in the Ministry of Health, and directors from the Ministry of Post-Secondary and Future Skills, as well as nurses, the chief nursing officers from the health authorities, to come for part of our meetings, where they can share what they're seeing and where we can share what we're seeing from post-secondary education and from a healthcare practice, and where we can together talk about what we see as potential opportunities to help make change. And you know what? Having them come and sharing what they're seeing and what's happening, and having them listen to what we're observing, has established some trust in relationships. And we now actually have our leadership invited to a lot of tables they haven't been before. And our table is one where people are consulting. During the pandemic, those leaders in government came to us a lot because they already saw our capacity and they already were part of those relationships. We face new challenges now and in the years ahead. Healthcare systems that are under strain, still the pandemic and the health effects of that. We're seeing new political and economic uncertainty and disruptions here and internationally. Climate change is having an impact on our health and well-being as well as our environments. We see rapidly advancing technology that is creating both great opportunities and some concerns. AI has some real opportunities and promise and also some potential challenges. There's been an erosion of trust in health professionals and health misinformation in our digital environment that creates real challenges. Political polarization, even war and extremism. And it's really hard to know how all these challenges will affect nurses and nursing practice. But I do have confidence that these same leadership approaches, positively reflecting and articulating what nursing is and who we are and what we can do, listening deeply and consulting with our colleagues and those we work with, drawing on their expertise to crowdsource those solutions, believing in and appreciating our teams, as Dr. Barling said, helping others rise for the future, finding those people who have the skills and ideas and giving them the opportunities to thrive in those roles. These are all ways that we can continue to come together as a collective to navigate that uncertainty ahead. And that includes those roles where we may not be in those official positions, but we all have an opportunity to lead alongside, or even sometimes managing up and leading our leaders by creating those opportunities to be that positive role model and express those small active appreciations on a regular basis that help people feel appreciated and seen for the work they do. And being able to actually help create the climate that makes it possible to be a healthy, thriving place and to see the leadership that's happening. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Saewyc. Again, I see the hearts and the applause. I was writing, there's so many notes, so many things that are going through my head, but already I'm seeing the threads that are connecting what Dr. Barling was saying. And I think about some of the words, you were talking about respect and trust and relationship building. I love when you talk about leading our leaders, right? Sometimes having to realizing by listening and watching and noticing that there's a gap and there's an opportunity there for you to step in and lead and to take you all to a better place. So thank you so much for sharing that. And I look forward to exploring that more when we get to our Q&A section. So I'm going to keep us moving along. Thank you again, Dr. Saewyc. And now I'm going to introduce Dr. Lee Chapman. So Dr. Chapman was named in 2023 as one of Maclean's top 10 healthcare innovators and as one of the 50 most influential Torontonians. As Chief Nursing Officer with Health Canada, Dr. Chapman recognizes the important contributions of nurses at the federal level and aims to ensure their integration into decisions impacting the profession. I will say for more details, because there's a lot, please look at the biographical details that I put in the chat earlier for the full list of Dr. Chapman's accomplishments. Dr. Chapman, we look forward to hearing from your experiences, and the microphone is yours.
Thank you so much. Merci beaucoup, and bonjour tout le monde. I'm delighted to be joining this esteemed group of panelists to talk about a number of things from sort of where I stand at the national level, from a pan-Canadian lens on what leadership looks like. And I think perhaps I would be remiss if I didn't start by saying that, graduates today will be working in jobs that currently don't exist. And I think I'm a perfect example of that. And that's not to say that jobs in healthcare will be obsolete, just that the nature of the roles will change. But certainly for half of my career, the role of the government chief nursing officer did not exist. It had been eliminated in Canada. From 2011-ish until 2022 when the role was reinstated. So I've now been in the role for just over 3 years. And I'm the seventh chief nurse in the history of Canada. And so I think this is a really important point to note that, when we think of some of the changes that are occurring at such a rapid pace currently within society and certainly within the health sector specifically. When we think about, when I taught in undergraduate programs, we would talk about being a knowledge broker. For patients who would come in and use sort of Dr. Google to figure out what their symptoms meant. Well, now there's a whole new level of data literacy that's needed when we think about the sort of anticipatory mindset that's needed for graduates. I did read recently around prompt engineering being the one tech skill that health professionals will need in the era of generative AI. So really thinking about this sort of futuristic mindset. And I think I'm really glad that Dr. Saewyc mentioned misinformation, disinformation, because it really speaks to the need for health professionals to be able to determine what is sort of deep fake and what is actually evidence-informed or evidence-based knowledge. If we look back to the COVID-19 pandemic, I think it provides some really tangible lessons. And that's kind of when I started in the role in 2022. We had just emerged from the first sort of 2 years of the COVID-19 pandemic. And certainly we saw some really historic things. We learned a lot of lessons, I know, from a federal perspective in terms of approving vaccines and getting vaccines to vulnerable communities. We had this is prior to me joining the federal government, but it was the largest vaccine campaign in Canada's history. So a lot of lessons. And one of the things that occurred in the health workforce was redeployment. And so I think certainly when I started in this role, we were seeing the effects of that redeployment. And there was a lot of talk of resiliency. And I think we like to jump to resiliency when we think about health leaders in particular, because there's always change. I graduated during the SARS epidemic, and of course have been through H1N1 and COVID really eclipsed all of those other health emergencies. But there's always something in healthcare. There's climate emergencies, all kinds of infectious disease cases and disasters that can occur that have a direct impact on health. And I think, when we jump to resiliency, we sometimes forget the lessons that Brené Brown talks about, which is really the importance of vulnerability. And certainly when I started in the role, nurses felt very gaslit by language around resiliency. They felt that it really undermined the trauma that they had experienced. Seasoned ICU nurses who had been working for decades in the intensive care unit talked about never experiencing so many deaths. And so it was a real shift for us, certainly within government, to actually talk about that collective trauma and the crisis and calling it what it was. And it was really a couple of crises colliding. It was not just the crisis of the COVID-19 pandemic, but also the crisis of the workforce that we continue to face. And you could add in, of course, the overdose crisis and other crises, the climate emergencies that we've seen with devastating impacts across the country. So lots of crises, I think, colliding. But I think it was very helpful to actually talk about vulnerability and to talk and when we were able to sort of peel back that onion, we were able to actually address what it was that nurses currently needed and wanted at that point in time, in sort of the fall of 2022, going into 2023. And that really led to the focus on nursing retention. And so certainly there were lots of efforts, as I'm sure Dr. Saewyc can attest, to add seats, to expand nursing education programs, not just in British Columbia, but everywhere across the country. There were recruitment incentives that were occurring, and a real preoccupation with how do we, get more nurses? How do we expand pathways for internationally educated health professionals? How do we keep the lights on in emergency departments and ensure that we're actually able to deliver care and not have very protracted surgical wait times? But nurses who had worked through the pandemic felt very ignored from those recruitment initiatives. And there was focused attention that was needed on them and their expertise. If we think about nursing really as a knowledge-based profession, we need to value the expertise of the knowledge workers. And that is really why we decided to focus on retention. So I worked with nurses from across the country, from every province and territory, in developing a nursing retention toolkit, which we released in March of 2024. And we're just now conducting an implementation analysis to see how it's being taken up across the country. But in general, I can say, just anecdotally, that it has been taken up with great enthusiasm across the country, and we're really excited. In some ways, it has been almost considered a bit of a de facto national nursing strategy, a different way of talking about how we value nursing. And in fact, the subtitle of the Nursing Retention Toolkit is Improving the Working Lives of Nurses in Canada. And so that is really the both the impetus and the ask that comes with the toolkit. And of course, the first theme in the toolkit is inspired leadership. So it talks about things like culture change, the leadership competencies that are needed, not just tools, but also training programs, because often we promote leaders to positions in healthcare because of their clinical competence and not because of their leadership acumen. But then it also talks about emerging leaders. And I know there's many students on here today. And so I think it's really important to recognize the leadership attributes of emerging leaders and the different perspectives and lenses that they bring to healthcare and how enriching that can be. Too often we are telling students what they don't know and what skills, additional skills they need to learn, particularly in the clinical environment. And that becomes this sort of almost paranoia, this preoccupation of students that, what happens if I haven't done this one particular skill? How will I actually be a nurse? And I think it's really important to recognize all of the things, all of the gifts that emerging leaders and new leaders do bring. And you've heard this, I think, through the previous two speakers, that leadership isn't about a title. It really is about how you show up every single day in the world, from wherever you stand, in whatever role you fulfill. And so I think it's also really important. I love the language around pulling other people up. We do need to ensure that we also have nurses and healthcare providers who are willing to be preceptors, who are willing to actually support learners in the clinical environment as supernumerary, as learners, with dedicated time for learning, to ensure that we actually have a viable health system for the future. In terms of a couple of other things I wanted to talk about is representation. So, one of the pieces is I think it's really important to ensure that we have policy leaders in healthcare. And certainly it wasn't until I was in this role that I realized how many of my experiences were directly policy roles or policy experiences. And so I think it was a mentor who actually was able to identify the threads in my CV for me, to land me in this job that I love. But really important to think about representation and ensuring that we also have nursing voices as elected officials. We did have a nurse minister for a very short period of time for the first time in Canadian history this year during the transitional government. It was Minister Kamal Kara. And we now don't have a nurse minister, but it was a short period of time. And I think it's really important to recognize when we do have nurses rising to positions, either elected officials or other positions. We have 2 nurse senators currently, but we certainly need more. And why do we need more? It's because of that piece that Dr. Saewyc mentioned. Nurses coordinate care. So they're often the systems navigators in the health system because they're most proximal to the point of care. And they're also the most trusted healthcare provider. And that advocacy role does transcend the therapeutic nurse-client relationship. Those relational skills are also so important when it comes to how we actually navigate systems change. And maybe just finally, I'll just say that the other piece of why I think the nursing lens is so important when it comes to leadership is because of the attunement to equity, because nurses are really seized with social determinants of health. So nurses always learn about this in nursing education programs, but not really as a theoretical construct, really in looking at, all of the things that may keep people unwell, as well as population challenges and public health challenges. And I think in this world that we're in currently, it's really important to think about how we can actually rig the system to better meet the needs of those who are structurally vulnerable. And nurses have a wonderful lens to bring to bear on that perspective. Really thinking about, how to better meet the needs of those in society who have unmet needs. And I do really hope that with all of the preoccupation right now around primary care attachment, that we're also not just thinking about the person who is housed with a phone and a car, but everyone else who ends up in the emergency department because of all of their vulnerability. And what primary care attachment may look like for them. And finally, I would just say with that equity perspective, it's really important to think about Indigenous people in Canada and how underrepresented they are in our health systems, and health education, health professions education in general, and that there may be, in fact, structural barriers. Well, we know there are structural barriers that actually impede their access to nursing education programs and to health professions education more broadly. And I say this in the context of the Canadian Medical Association recently issuing an Indigenous apology for the harms inflicted on Indigenous people by the medical community. The Canadian Federation of Nurses Unions also followed suit this year with a pledge to do better. And so I think that with this lens of what the future looks like, it also has to be mindful of our collective goals around reconciliation in this country. And that's a really important perspective to bear when it comes to actually transforming the health system now and in the future. And last thing I'll say, final word, is just that miracles happen every single day in healthcare. I think often we can gravitate to the headlines of horrible, egregious things that may have happened, but it is a miracle when a baby is born. It is a miracle when somebody receives effective wound care and doesn't need IV antibiotics. It is a miracle when somebody is able to walk out of the ICU or even go home after same-day surgery. And it is a miracle that there are nurses in very rural and remote parts of this country delivering care very autonomously in remote and isolated communities. And so I leave you with that those leadership behaviors are essential for all of those miraculous things that are part of our everyday practice in healthcare. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you, Dr. Chapman, for again sharing about your healthcare advocacy, your leadership, and again, just looking at some of these threads, I was writing words down. You talked about mentorship and that someone helped you rise, right? And helped you in terms of getting an opportunity. And I thought that was really lovely, that kind of full circle moment. I also thought it was important when you talked about Indigenous community and our commitments and how we can, um, work to ensure that we have Indigenous voices at the table and in leadership positions to help make decisions that are going to impact all of us. So thank you so much for that. So I'm looking at the clock. We are, it's been a great session, but we're quickly running out of time. So I'm going to open up. We did have a question that's already come in. We've got two, I think, right now. I'm going to put one question out, and I'm going to see if we can try and do around 5, 6 minutes, 7 minutes or so on questions, because I know that Dr. Lily would like to do a closing, and I know that we have a hard stop at 2:30, and I want to respect our panelists' time. So, Kristen, we had a question from Kristen, and this was specifically to Dr. Chapman, actually. And it was saying, as we emerge from multiple crises and now navigating geopolitical crises impacting healthcare, how do we lead in nursing education in a way that inspires and grounds nurses to do the multifaceted work that they do?
Oh, what a great question. And I'm wondering if Dr. Saewyc may want to pitch in as well. I may do you want to start? Or do you want me to start? I saw you came off mute there for a second.
You go ahead first.
Okay. I think I think how I would answer this question is, to me, what's very grounding for me from this pan-Canadian perspective in thinking about that we have lots of complexity in Canada with our federation. We have 2 official languages. We have this massive geography. We have 4 categories of nurse. We have over 400,000 nurses. We're still working on getting accurate counts, but it's around 480,000 nurses. And to me, what is so inspirational is the fact that we're connected to this global community, that we're connected to nurses around the world. We're connected certainly to nurses across the country, but we're connected to the global nursing community and the incredible work that is being done every single day all around the world, by nurses, is, I think, very inspirational to me in thinking about, it is nurses who are working in conflict zones, who are working, it is, nurses who run into the fire when there are these crises. And that to me is very grounding. I do think grounding and inspirational. I think that, there's lots of competing challenges and priorities. But nursing education is really focused on entry to practice competencies that are intended to be broader than, exam competencies in preparation for practice. So it's preparation for that unknown future. And to me, that is very helpful. In sort of navigating these uncertain times. There will always be jobs in healthcare, certainly in this country and beyond. But of course, we want to retain you all in Canada. And I think that nursing education is wonderful preparation to prepare for an inspiring future.
Thanks, Lee. That's a great lead-in to sort of my thoughts on the same thing. We really need to keep remembering that even with the variety of geopolitical crises and the unimaginable new future in nursing, there are still some really important fundamentals: relational practice and equity focus, being able to actually problem solve and critically think, understanding the why behind the physiology and what's happening, really helps create that confidence in nurses and gives them the variety of skills so that when the new and unusual and the new opportunities emerge, they can recognize and create those solutions. I think that as educators, we need to make sure that people have the fundamentals around a professional practice. That is that relational practice, that therapeutic listening, the variety of skills and knowledge that is that bridging, that really the building blocks. But I totally agree with Lee that sharing the examples and ideas and opportunities of this is the different faces of nursing across the world means that we also get those opportunities to see the innovation that is happening across the world and be inspired within our own educational settings and inspire those nursing students to become nurses in other places of the world as well as here in Canada.
Thank you so much for those answers. I just wanted to say that we are pretty much going to probably have to stop there. Unfortunately, I did want to say, Kristen said thank you. Thank you for answering that question. I did want to mention that there was a comment from Ron. Ron just said thank you for raising awareness and respect for healthcare inequity for Indigenous communities, especially rural and remote, and that more funding is needed for rural and remote healthcare. So just wanted to put that out there. And then in terms of Stacy and Taylor and Netha, sorry, we can't get to your questions. Actually, Netha said, thank you for your inspiring presentations and great discussion. I think we need to have a part two, minus technical challenges. We'll get it right 100% out of the gate next time. But I really just want to say thank you. At this point, my role as moderator is drawing to an end. And so I'm going to turn things over to Dr. Lily Lum for some concluding remarks. Thanks so much.
Oh, hi, everyone. I feel a sense of power getting the last word on this meeting. First of all, I'd like to thank all of you who have attended the conversation today. Lisa and I tend to be risk takers. We say, oh, this is a great idea. We leap without thinking about the details. So what happened over the last few months is we had to recruit wonderful volunteers to help us make this happen. And 5 minutes before the session started, we also had tech assistants helping our keynote speakers log in. So what the point I want to say is that, we have to work as a team. We help each other. And I think that's the message we've heard today. It doesn't matter your position, but we need to work as a team. So I want to thank all the people who have made the coordination and the team to put this meeting together. Also, then I want to, I'll keep my comments brief. It's very hard to say add anything else to what our keynote speakers have said. What we have experienced is a sharing of their wisdom, their caring, and their concrete ideas as to how we can be better leaders, how we can make our world a better place. So I just want to share a couple of comments about each one. Dr. Barling, what strikes me about Dr. Barling is he is an absolute wizard, Harry Potter type wizard, at taking very dry, dense research information and give us a presentation that everybody gets excited about. He can give us a recipe that we can actually understand. And I don't want to embarrass him, but I keep reading one of his leadership books. And every time I read it, I think, oh my, there's something else. And so what I'm trying to say is that dig deep into evidence. We need more research. And one of the points that he makes is that we need to base our leadership skills and actions on evidence. And sometimes there'll be no evidence, but then we trust our instincts based on our experience and what the evidence tells us. And so I would encourage you to, those who are audience who are researchers, we need more research. We need more evidence. It may not be, the clinical trials level, but we need the kind of experiential research that's going to improve our quality of lives. And Dr. Saewyc, well, to be head of a nursing program that's 100 years old is pretty impressive. To finally get a building having your own building, believe me, in a university, it's high status. And I think that it's her leadership that's led to the fruition of that. And she's very modest. She consults on an international level. I know that the British Columbia network of nursing educators, directors, and deans, they have been very clever in bringing in the policymakers. They've been very clever in bringing the practitioner leaders. That multidisciplinary, multi-conceptual approach is another aspect of the leadership that she role models. I imagine that the people who work with her feel privileged to have her as their leader. And I'm sure she'd be happy to share other things with you if you want to contact her. Then Dr. Chapman. Well, we are so proud to have you as the chief nurse. I think that sounds like status, the chief of something. But she's so modest. And I really appreciate her taking a global lens. I think we're all facing challenges, whether it's health, politics, climate. I mean, every day I think about what the health implications, the implications for the healthcare system is bringing in terms of climate change, equity issues, issues related to vulnerable population. And she is a visionary in saying that we need to focus in on not only deal with the local, but deal with the global. And her recommendation that we engage in political shaping the politics. I think that nurses have been very reluctant to get involved in the policy level. I myself have spent a number of years working in health policy, and it's I can say it's a very transition between nursing education, nursing practice, health policy, that it really is a very important role to have that multi-conceptual role. I know there are probably, I suspect there are people, the attendees who are not in health, who may be in business, and you may be only more focused on higher education. What I hope the message for today is that the knowledge, the wisdom, the guidance we've heard can be applied across contexts. And so I would hope that you would think about, not just because, there's a lot of conversation about health and nursing, that a lot of the information can be used in whatever. I have a family member who's banking. I know nothing about banking other than it involves money. But you know what? I'm hearing the same issues in the banks, in the investment field. It's because we're all human. It's all relational. Leadership is about relational. Which leads to my very last point. I actually have a last point. Again, I'm going to embarrass Dr. Barling. And one of the things that he enlightened me on is the notion is that leaders only function because there are followers. There's no leader that can be effective or ineffective without followers. Each of us are followers. And I often hear questions from students saying, well, my boss or my supervisor is really not very effective. I'm very frustrated. What can I do to change? And I think that my final message is we're all followers. We're all leaders in certain ways. I think we have a collective responsibility to do the best in our positions, to do what is going to pull everybody up. The respect, the caring, the creativity. And the final comment is we desperately need innovation, especially those of us in Canada. We lose talent. We're a small country, but I think if we help each other, we can actually role model and be leaders for others in healthcare, business, higher education. And finally, in terms of what next? Well, Lisa is putting up information about the survey. If you're interested in getting a recording of this session, you can contact the project email on Gmail, and we would be happy to share whatever information that you are requesting from us. And again, finally, on behalf of the team, our 3 guest speakers, and all the people who have made this success, which started as Lisa and I have this grand idea. We thought it'd be easy to give a webinar. We've learned our lesson. Webinars are both challenging and fun. And we wish you all the best in your workplace and in your personal lives. And thank you very much for attending.